Welcome everybody to our session here on the Purchasing Power series that's taking place. And this one is focused on how can social procurement support local economies. We're going to be together for an hour and have a chance to have a really great conversation. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kristi Fairholm-Mader. I am the project manager of the BC Social Procurement Initiative and co-founder of organization called Scale Collaborative, which is located here on the Algonquin-speaking territories and Songhees and Esquimalt nations here in southern Vancouver Island, also known as Victoria, BC, and really excited to not only get to be a part of this project, but also get to facilitate this conversation today. And I'd like to just also recognize Emma. Emma, do you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kristi. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Renarts, and I'm the Communications and Education Coordinator at BiSocial Canada, and we're proud to be a project delivery partner for the BCSPI work, and really great to be here today and share this learning with you all. So thanks.
So a little bit about the BC Social Procurement Initiative. This is a local government for local government by local government initiative. It's overseen and directed by our members, of which there's currently over 30. And it's really to look at how do we change the culture of public sector procurement to direct those spending dollars towards community benefit. And so, if everyone can please mute themselves, I'm hearing hiccups. That would be great. And this has been going on, this initiative is going on for the last 2.5 years, 3 years coming up. And as mentioned, local governments and institutional purchasers across BC are welcome to join and become members of this initiative and to help receive the supports to transition those dollars that are already being spent into measurable and community benefits. And this is some of what the members receive. There's templates and examples, case studies and stories. There's hands-on consultation and support around how to take community strategic goals and align to procurement and move forward and put them into the documents and procurement systems that exist. We have regular training that's offered to members. That includes, laddering up through, basic social procurement practices to implementation, to construction projects and infrastructure. So really, trade agreements, all those things that really matter to procurement folks, as well as we have webinar libraries on a full range of topics and lots of resources. So every member shares what they're doing, and we get an opportunity to see, what does purchasing policy look like in Campbell River, and what does it look like in Squamish, and how are people moving it forward and sharing those practices and best practices between the community. And we have a bi-monthly community of practice that takes place. And then we're also building out resources specifically around suppliers and vendors and how to engage them around social procurement, and what's being the opportunities that they get to have to showcase the work that they do in communities and the benefits that they bring, as well as a tool to measure impact and align it to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So lots of stuff in there. And our members really range from growing across the province. So it started off with Vancouver Island and the coast. And it's, like I mentioned, a little over 30 members, and now growing to other parts of BC. So this is a BC focused initiative, really open again to those community-based institutional purchasers and local governments. So you can contact and check out our website to see what you would, if you're interested in becoming a member, and how to onboard and all the member benefits that exist in there. So part of what we're doing is to look at how do we align local government and institutional priorities to procurement and purchasing power, and that it's really looking at how procurement can become another tool in communities' toolbox for building those healthy communities and inclusive economies. And we polled our members and asked, what are the critical issues that are facing communities today that could benefit from aligning procurement to help address those? Thinking of building out that robust toolbox. And from there, we got about 15 responses of what was really mattering to communities. And we picked these 5 to have this series around and to dig a little bit deeper into it. Our 5 is, engaging Indigenous businesses, which was our first session that we had a few weeks ago, supporting local economies, which is today. Our next one is increasing food security. We'll have a conversation on addressing equity and diversity, and then also climate change. And then we'll do a wrap-up event, which is around how do you take concrete next steps and pulling some of those concepts together. And we've structured these series as a place to have a conversation about what is possible. And for each of these, we've invited 2 or 3 speakers to each session that represent both a purchaser experience and perspective, as well as a supplier or vendor perspective. So we're looking at both sides of that relationship. And the goal is to understand some of the challenges that exist, to provide examples of what's being tried, and to imagine together what's possible. And you'll notice that in the chat, Emma will drop in resources. And this is so as we have the conversation, we can drop in resources into it so people can refer to those. And afterwards, we do send out, the PowerPoint, we'll send out a recording of this session and any of the resources that are mentioned and brought together. So you will have access to that. So let's talk about local economies. And local economies, especially in recovery from COVID, are critical to vibrant and healthy communities. We know this explicitly and we know it intuitively, that we've also are on a decades-long shift to big global supply chains, increased, big box stores, loss of local ownership that has led to, and really looking at economic development that focuses on primarily jobs without considering sort of the quality of those jobs, or where those who stewards or shepherds those jobs. And so, and we also see that there's, with an increase of online shopping, that there's the potential for continually driving to lower wages, borne by people without government protections, right? In other parts of the world, that we can see increased climate impacts through those individual order and delivery systems that are taking place, and that we see increasingly complex supply challenges. So it is, our local economies exist within this global framework that we have. And so we know that the underpinnings of a global economy was, cheap oil and gas and transportation. That we saw that there was exploitable labor markets, as I mentioned, and some environmental externalities. So those things weren't considered or counted for, and also free flows of large amounts of capital. So there's this whole shift, but that these underpinnings are changing, and we're seeing a shift in global economies, is that those environmental and social impacts are being felt widespread, and that we're beginning to see some of those shifts that made the global economy to be really efficient, maybe have some questions that provide an opportunity for, local economies to be revitalized in a way that might be important for how we move forward. And so it's important to look at how local economies can help achieve climate goals, how they can protect vulnerable people and environments, and how we can think about building wealth within our communities. And I wanted to say, this is one of the main messages from Ron from last session around engaging Indigenous businesses, is he really talked about taking a wealth building perspective, and looking at how we build a community that has wealth held in community and by community. And this also includes the, an economic base that Amy's going to talk to, which includes the 4 Ps. So I'm really excited. This is going to be a really dynamic and interesting conversation that we're going to touch on many different things. And first of all, I want to now unshare. Well, no, I won't unshare first. I will introduce our speakers. So just a second, pull up my next notes. Here we go. So we have privileged to have these 2 speakers here today. We have Amy Robinson, who's the founder and executive director of LOCO BC. Amy brings over 20 years experience working with businesses to embed sustainability into operations. And she's worked with organizations ranging from small and medium-sized enterprises to big industry, regional governments, and international with the UN. And today she's going to bring her passion for small businesses with their unique challenges and opportunities. And she was the founder of LOCO BC, which is looking at research on local businesses, covering economic multiplier effect and the impact of online shopping on local businesses, which I just touched on. Some of the empty storefront issues that might be taking place in different communities, and strategies to protect the businesses and generate positive economic impacts. Alisha is the Community Economic Development Planner with City of Vancouver. She is the social planner in the Community Economic Development Department, where she looks at implementing the city's community benefit agreement policy and building the capacity of local social enterprises and small businesses. So I'm going to unshare and start our conversation. So Amy, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about yourself and why you started LOCO BC and just anything that I might have missed in my quick introduction.
Yeah, it has to do, I mean, I started my career in sustainability before that was a word or had a university option. So I started in environmental science and started working with different kinds of businesses. And then some of the sustainable business conferences I started going to in the States were really focused around this idea of like some of the first social entrepreneurs that tried to build social values, bake them into their business models. And then when they followed the traditional growth trajectory, realized that, oh, if you get investors or if you go public, you really can't maintain those values. And so started thinking about the three pillars of sustainability, that the economic side is largely ignored. Most people just sort of think, oh, well, that's a business's ability to make profit and to function as a business in the economy. And so I started to think about how it could be framed differently in terms of, like you mentioned in your intro, really building wealth, both for employees and owners and the community, region, province that a business operates in.
Great, thank you. Alisha, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the City of Vancouver?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for having me here today. So as a social planner in community economic development, our portfolio is quite diverse. So right now we're working on implementing the city's community benefit agreement policy on large development projects across the city. We also oversee funding and support operations of a downtown Eastside market, which supports low barrier vendors to access a market and sell their goods and services. We're implementing a reduced fare transit pilot project right now, which is an action coming out of our emerging poverty reduction strategy, which our team is also leading, and where we have also a number of social procurement and local economy targets as part of our poverty reduction. As well as supporting and funding a women's economic development program in the downtown east side and advancement of the city's sustainable and ethical procurement framework across the city, but in particular with a focus on social and diverse and Indigenous suppliers, and supporting the capacity building of our local social enterprises and diverse owned businesses. So we're doing quite a bit in this area and always looking to see where we can improve and do more.
Alisha. So I'm going to start with a kind of a base question is, how do you define local? And I know that both of you define it slightly different. So I'd love to hear from Amy first.
We have a definition of local so we focus on 3 areas of local for one thing, local owned businesses, local grown products and local made products. And most of the reason why we created our definitions for those products were for our consumer facing campaign. But we really want to focus on impact. So we are not so restrictive in that it has to be defined exactly this way, and more so that we want businesses who want to talk about how they're local to really understand where particularly their economic impact, but also their social and environmental impact, where it comes from, and to improve it if they at all can. So we define it a certain way. It's available on our consumer facing site at bcbylocal.com, but we really encourage other people to look at like what's valuable to them in terms of what do they value, what things do they have to balance, but particularly if you're trying to create economic benefit, then the closer you are to home, your region, your province. We felt like the province of BC was a decent economic region where you could get most of your goods and services. So we mostly define locally owned businesses more than 50% owned in BC.
How about you, Alisha? How do you find local?
Yeah, so we have 2 different ways we define local within the city. One is through our community benefit agreement implementation process, in which we have a 10% of value spend on large development projects through both construction and operations to go towards social and local procurement. And so how we define local in this context is that we're looking at a concentric circle model. So we look at where that development project is being built. What is the neighborhood it's being built in and the geographic location immediately surrounding it? start by procuring from local and social suppliers in that geographic neighborhood. And if we can't meet the demands of that project there, then we look to branch that out in that concentric circle model. So then we look to city core neighborhoods where we've identified that there are folks with low incomes and high poverty existing in those core neighborhoods across Vancouver. So we go to those neighborhoods, and if we can't find it there, we then go citywide. And then from there, Metro Vancouver, Lower Mainland, and then we end at province-wide. So that's what we do for CVA. But we also have a definition that we work with for our sustainable and ethical procurement framework, in which we're looking very similarly in a concentric circle model and trying to work with suppliers as local as possible in the way that I just explained. But if that can't be achieved, then we're looking beyond the province and going Canada-wide. And if we can't achieve it in Canada, then we are looking internationally, but we're encouraging and we're making sure in those RFPs and in those contracts response that there is a requirement that there is a subcontracting opportunity or a way to collaborate with some of our local and diverse owned suppliers right here in Vancouver.
So Amy, can you talk a little bit about the local business trends that you see? Where do you see, can you just give a quick overview of where you see the local businesses and local economies being able to best meet institutional purchaser needs?
Sure. I mean, local businesses in general are very innovative and, they can scale up or down quickly and respond to the market. So that's one of the things that's great about them and a strength that they have. I know some purchasers worry about, businesses' ability to, their capacity and all of those things. And that's fair enough. But they are quite nimble. And so that is one thing small and local businesses have going for them. Businesses that are local are often small, but not always small. So we have small is defined as under 50 in BC, and it's under 100 in the rest of Canada. So it's in BC, our definition of small is quite small. So we have some amazing local businesses who are not small, but they still have some of the same challenges fighting against multinational competitors as small businesses. The trends, I mean, we've seen starting decades ago with shared service contracts and, contract bundling and things like that. I definitely have been hearing from business to business suppliers that more and more contracts were going to foreign owned companies, even like print contracts and things that you'd think would be local were being offshored and then shipped to them and things like that. So it hasn't been great. That's part of the reason why I wanted to be involved in the BCSPI rollout, is seeing the opportunity that might be swinging back towards some of those suppliers. Small businesses have, of course, had a really hard time during all the restrictions in the last 2 years with COVID-19, and so they need all the support that they can get.
Why do local economies matter?
Well, the money that you spend with a local business, it recirculates in the local economy. Our most recent research shows 4.6 times. So every dollar you spend has 4.6 times the economic impact, which translates into, profits and salary for local owners, purchasing to local suppliers. So that might be for inventory products, consumables, or for services to the business. But those are so much more often go to local businesses than when it's a consolidated supply chain in a big multinational. There's the payroll to BC employees, all of the higher level marketing jobs, warehousing, transportation, all that kind of stuff is often in-house with the business and circulated around its headquarters. So if it's based here, then those higher level jobs are going to be based here as well. And then local businesses more often, I think 24 times per dollar of revenue compared to their competitors, give to local charities. So they might be charities, might just be causes that aren't registered charities, but like the local soccer team or school or homeless shelter or whatever. And so they're much more charitable and they're more directly targeted to charities in their communities. So all of that translates to a much higher economic recirculation of the revenues that come into local businesses.
I like that. Can you talk a bit more? I mean, you touched on it briefly, but can you talk a bit more about what the City of Vancouver is currently doing in terms of social procurement and connection to local economic and community development?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned, we have a sustainable and ethical procurement framework, and that framework right now has a goal to reach 50% of all awarded contracts and 50% of the value of those contracts to go to social and diverse suppliers by the end of 2023. So we're definitely monitoring and tracking that through a number of my colleagues, including Kim Buxa and Alexander Ralph, who are leading a lot of that work there. The city is also working to achieve this goal by implementing, the framework, and it relies on all city staff to know this framework well and be responsible across each department and each business unit division to practice this framework and the goals that it's trying to achieve and the criteria that it has set out, and including that information in writing their request for proposals or request for quotation, et cetera. And putting that language and those requirements in the contracts with their respected initiatives or goods or services that they're looking to buy. So there's a lot of education that my colleagues Kim Buxa, Alexander Ralph, and that team have done across the city to work with different departments and our city's leadership team to really learn this framework and how to practice it, how to put it into their initiatives and their contracts, and continually, as we do that and as we roll it out, learn where we can all improve together, and where we can hear from the community as well when, sometimes we make mistakes, and that's part of our learning, and where we can improve upon this framework too. But in addition to that framework, our CED team that I'm a part of also implements social and diverse procurement through the implementation of our community benefit agreement policy. So that policy requires that 10% of the value spent on both goods and services in the construction phase of the development project and through operations up to 5 years, and then a negotiated process to go longer into operations, is to go towards supporting local, social, and diverse owned businesses. So we have to report our goals and recommendations, on how that's coming along. We look at how these development projects are impacting our local community, listen to the community to hear where we can better improve that or build capacity within our social enterprises to meet those CBA demands. And that's something that we're constantly learning and growing as well. And then lastly, we also, the CED team had put out a social enterprise recovery report as part of our COVID-19 recovery work across the city. And this report was done in August 2020. It was led by our manager and senior social planner, Shabna Ali. And we've given that over to Emma to share and really encourage folks to read that. And there's definitely quite a bit of recommendations and goals that we have as a city, but that we're also encouraging other institutions, other governments, other businesses to think differently about procurement and how this is a tool to support recovery from COVID-19.
So, Alisha, I'm hoping that you can talk about a little bit of, if we go into procurement, I'm going to say procurement geek, is that the two things that we hear about local is that A, you can't do this within the trade agreements, and B, it will cost more. So I'm wondering if you could take some time and talk about those two critiques.
Yeah, I love pushing back on those two critiques. You can absolutely purchase local and social and still remain within those trade agreement requirements. When you're writing your request for proposals, RFQ, expression of interests, and your contracts, you want to think about focusing on your institution or your organization, your government's goals. What are the goals that you have, citywide if you're a government, municipal government? What impacts are you looking to create in your local community? And in particular, you want to write that into your contract. You want to ask these bidders, how are they going to help your city or your organization meet those goals, create a more healthier community? And those goals can be social, cultural, environmental components. And it's about putting those components in the contracts and RFPs. You can also directly ask bidders to share how they're going to work with local community or the local neighborhood in which this initiative or this contract is impacting. You could ask, what's the relationship or experience working in that particular neighborhood, for example? What do they know of the city or your organization's goals and strategies? How can they help you meet your, so in the case of City of Vancouver, help us meet the Healthy City strategy, our Downtown Eastside plan, our CED strategy, or help us meet our recommendations to be a city of reconciliation. You can ask bidders to share how and who they employ, how that can help meet your organization's equity and diversity goals, even living wage employment wages. So questions around this can be included. You can ask who the bidders work with in collaboration in the past. Have they done collaborative contracts? Have they worked with local communities? And what have they done that they can speak to? And you can also ask the bidders to share how they will support Vancouver's economy. How are they going to really impact that neighborhood and that local economy through this project or contract or initiative? But the key thing with all of those questions and including embedding that language and those social components is that we need to also consider the weighting of those questions and the weighting of that component in the evaluation and answering to these contracts. And so while you're waiting on technical requirements, quality, and price, don't forget about weighting that social component, those questions, and how that compares across in weighting. So if you really think about where this project is going to impact, if we were to think about the downtown east side, and this project is about focusing on alleviating poverty and working with our local social enterprises or local community there, you might want to think about the weighting on the social components being a bit higher because we have a number of folks living in poverty in that neighborhood and we really want to address those goals. So that is a really important thing to consider. And you want to know that what you've asked in your contracts and the language that you've put in there, that you're seeing that reflected back from the bidders as well.
You also said that you've seen, back to the cost question about, is that you've been seeing the same kind of quality and price coming from the local businesses that have bid. And so, and you have some data and tracking around that. I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so it definitely would say that it's not necessarily true that by buying social or local, it costs more. We've definitely, have received the same quality and price from local and social diverse suppliers through tracking that information to help the city achieve its 50% awarded value and awarded contract goals. We have seen that that is possible. We have also seen instances where social and local suppliers are a bit more expensive, and that does happen. But the thing that we have to remember is when that happens, we as institutions, cities, organizations, we have to think about our goals again and go back to the impact. So if we maybe put a few more dollars up front in this contract and pay that company to do that work, we're saving ourselves money down the line in Band-Aid solutions around poverty reduction, climate change, reconciliation. We're making sure that we're creating meaningful opportunities to meet those goals and not putting that money into problem solving down the road.
So Amy, I'm wondering if you can talk and focusing on, you said that you made a great case that not all local businesses are small businesses, that there's a whole range of them, but I'm wondering if you can speak specifically to the small local business. What could social procurement mean for those types of businesses? And where do you see any sort of challenges or opportunities in engaging our smaller business network?
There's a huge opportunity, I think, for small businesses, partly because it can mean such a big impact on their business in terms of them being able to hire and grow, and so the opportunity is really there. I think that some of the smaller businesses that I've talked to really don't know the process. And so one of the challenges is, if there's like a 100-page contract or, a really complicated RFP, then you're not likely to get small businesses bidding. They're not regularly perusing BC Bid and places like that. So the municipalities that I've seen or purchasers that have been more successful are typically actively trying to, try something out with one of their contracts and do it in a way, in an area where they've already sort of established that there might be some local interest from businesses that have the capacity to either do it themselves or partner to deliver. So part of it is really committing, I think, to, a different way to do the outreach and to, to be involved in the community economic development that will come from those dollars being spent locally instead of leaving the community.
Do you see any disadvantages that can come from purchasing from, I mean, we're talking about local businesses, and local economies is much bigger than just local businesses, but I'm wondering if there's any challenges or disadvantages in doing business locally.
Not that I would ever. I would say, I mean, other people would probably say like, oh, it's gonna, maybe you open yourself up to nepotism, or you are less likely to encourage competition. Those are the typical arguments. But I think there's lots of, we have lots of businesses in different categories. It's not, you're not typically just going to find like one printer or one caterer in the local market. So, most supply categories, you're going to find a whole bunch of local businesses that are going to be able to bid. So you'll find the same kind of competition. And if you're looking for diversity, diverse owned businesses and other things, like Alisha mentioned, you're going to find all of that too.
And I did, when we were chatting earlier, I thought you made a really interesting point that talks about, the price piece and the cost, and that even the price is always a concern, if I want to kind of pre-quote you, and that sometimes things may be more expensive, but that's also because we're paying for Canadian real estate, we're paying for Canadian social and environmental standards. Like that is part of what we're supporting in terms of price. And even though we don't see a huge difference in terms of that, because that's not being borne out by evidence, there is sometimes where that makes sense. And so,
yeah, I think I totally agree with what Alisha said about that. We, by doing it now, then we're preventing, more costs down the road in terms of, sucking the wealth out of our communities that should be circulating and providing good jobs and lifting more people up. And yeah, you have basically, it's just not, I don't think it should be a question of cost. It should be a question of value. And when you talk about value, then it's a lot easier to see like, oh, where am I getting the best value? Well, this company has embedded standards for the environment. Maybe I don't have to then spend my staff time going out to figure out, is this supplier that's in the US or overseas, like how are they treating their employees, and what kind of environmental standards do they have? So those things you can be more confident about and might save you more staff time. And I guess I would ask Metro Vancouver how they're feeling about their foreign contract for their, sewage treatment plant right now. Like hiring a foreign, you don't have as much control. You just don't. And so that's costing a lot more money to all the taxpayers because, a local construction company wasn't hired to do that contract. So I think it can really come around to bite you if you don't know who your suppliers are. And it's a lot easier to know what their practices are if they're local businesses.
So Alisha, you passed your framework by council in 2015, and I'm wondering, that's given you good, like lots of lessons learned. I'm wondering if you can talk about what you've learned in the process from passing that social procurement framework, and what kind of best practices that if you could talk a little bit about the process and any sort of best practices or key learnings that you've had over that time the city's had.
Yeah, I think one of the best things I could say is that you always go back to community, always go back to the suppliers and hear from them. Learn what, where are their gaps in responding to the contracts that are coming out of the city, where there is a need for support around education on how to respond, or just being able to write better bids or proposals. back to these contracts. But then how can we as a city and through practicing, and putting this framework into implementation, how we learn from that and continually get to refine the framework that we have and improve it. I think it's also really great as a city and as any institution or organization to continually learn from institutions or governments at a similar level to you, and hear what their best practices are. What are they doing? What kind of pilots are they testing? What kind of frameworks are they putting forward? What goals are they trying to achieve by using social procurement as a tool to do that? And learning the data there. And like we've learned quite a bit from the success of what's happening in Calgary and Toronto. And look to see, the success of a lot of the members around the BCSPI initiative as well. I think the key thing is that with the city right now, we have a sustainable and ethical procurement framework. So framework is the key word here. We have the opportunity that as we continue to listen and learn and continue to build on that framework, we can develop a better social procurement policy. And then we can take what we have and make that more a mandated thing across our internal departments and across the city in our purchasing, rather than encouraging and asking for best efforts across the department. So that is something that we can look towards and continue to build on. And then when we think about the community benefit agreement policy, which was developed and passed by council in 2018, we worked with Bisocial Canada to develop the toolkits in implementing that policy. And even with Bisocial Canada and the development industry and general contractors and a large working group that we have across the city to look at gaps and trends in development projects and local supply chains for construction materials, goods, and services. We've learned so much about how we can even tweak that toolkit and tweak the implementation of our policy every step of the way as we apply it to these development projects. And it's again, going back and sharing out how that's coming along as updates with community, and then listening where we're missing. Who have we forgotten about? Where are the voices that aren't included? What are the gaps that we still haven't addressed? So it's constantly, listening and learning and sharing with your local communities, with your suppliers, because if we don't and we continue to think that what we're doing is what's best, we're going to go down a wrong path. We need to continually improve and continually be educated by the suppliers who we're trying to impact.
The City of Vancouver is big. You guys are big with like lots of people that can bring their brains to this, and a lot of the members of the BC Social Procurement Initiative and across BC and many small communities don't necessarily have access to the sheer number of people that are working on the challenge together. I'm wondering if you have any advice or suggestions for smaller and mid-sized governments who may have, just a different capacity in terms of their staffing capacity, on how they can begin to bring social procurement or implement such frameworks and policies in their communities.
Yeah, of course. I think that as I had mentioned before, we're always learning from other cities and municipalities about what they're doing. And so, learning as well from what we've done and, right size your response around contracts to your municipality, right sizing the criteria and your goals and your frameworks. So starting there and taking what you might see as something big and grandiose and bringing that down and narrowing your focus and your goals. Test, pilot. Like if you can get pilot projects and you can test something, do it. It's always important to try. And if you fail, well, you still learn something. So, continue to push for piloting these social procurement initiatives. It's really, really important, that education piece, to work across departments and teams within your organization, raising awareness about why social procurement and local diverse supplier procurement is important, how it helps those teams and their projects meet specific goals, and then how does it also help your organization or your government meet its, citywide or larger organizational goals. Find your local community economic development community networks, and, work with them, listen to them, learn from them, and look at where you can, put some of your spending into funding to support these networks to start up things like social procurement roundtables, where they can bring together and convene conversations around bringing suppliers and buyers together, help support that relationship building, debunk myths around procurement, and be able to educate one another on how they can support each other as buyers and suppliers. And by leaving the city out of that conversation and allowing the community to work through that together. And I'm sure that's something that also the BCSPI initiative can definitely help with folks around in this audience and attending these series. And then I think for the general audience, the more advocacy that folks do around social procurement, the more education, the more talks like this that we see out in the general public and in the community, the more we have internally as governments or large institutions to practice and implement social procurement.
Great, thank you. Amy, I'm going to ask you one question, then we'll open it up for questions so people can get ready. Feel free to pop questions into the chat as we go. Amy, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the use of directories and some of the work you're doing around community impact assessments and some of just how purchasers can find and verify and understand the impact that they're making in partnership with local businesses.
Absolutely. I think I take Alisha's point, and I think it's important that just, there's so much experience out there and expertise, and businesses learn from each other. I think that purchasers should learn from each other, through your networks, through BCSPI. You can find out, what's working. And, it seems like most purchasers are open to sort of beg, borrow, and steal their tools to connect and the directories and things that they use. We do provide some tools. Our research, I think some of our research studies have been shared in the links to them have been shared in the chat. And we have done studies on the economic impact of different kinds of local suppliers, including B2B suppliers. The frameworks for those economic impact studies are basically looking at where profit recirculates when it goes to a local business. So I think that local businesses just in general typically buy from, they hire local employees, they buy from local suppliers more often than those local businesses who are really committed to the community. So, they're going to have a bigger impact anyway, but then we always ask you to look for things like, living wage and hiring people with barriers to employment and sort of integrating more of the social impact that also gets you the economic impact. And so we provide, we have been doing for a while a community impact assessment with businesses, and you'll find those stories on bcbuylocal.com/business. And so you can see how we're trying to tease out the supply chain and the social and environmental aspects of businesses. Those are mostly consumer facing businesses, but now we have a new tool on that site under How Are You Local? That is a community assessment that any business can do. So that's a tool, like by all means, you can use that as a framework as well, that you might integrate it with your RFP. We'd be super happy to help too, if that's useful. We have directories, your chamber, your local chamber, your BIAs, economic development departments, and those kinds of things are excellent places to connect with the local business community to start to do that outreach.
Great, thank you. All right, so we'll open it up for questions. So we have one from Dave. Dave wants to, Dave, do you want to unmute and say your question yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Dave in Halifax. Just want to know, what support, if any, the city provides to just social enterprises in the procurement process. For a lot of us, it's a brand new world, and we don't necessarily have the deep resources on board to help us through that process. So just curious what support you guys provide.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a number of number of ways we support our local social enterprises. One is through, as I've mentioned already, the implementation of both our sustainable and ethical procurement framework. So by looking at where we can purchase goods and services across the city from local social enterprises, and making sure that we can do that wherever possible. As well as through the implementation of our CBA policy, using that as an opportunity to continually look to buy from local, social, and diverse owned suppliers. And while we also monitor the trends of implementing that policy across projects, how can we work with our intergovernmental and cross-government departments in the province and the feds to better fund some of these initiatives, the social enterprises, or even some of the training programs that help to build capacity and ensure that folks who may experience poverty are getting hired on with our local, diverse, and social enterprises as well. But beyond that, there's also the fact that we have some grants around like poverty reduction or organizational capacity building grants. And so through our social policy and projects team, we have provided funding to community economic development networks to host things like social procurement roundtables to support building the capacity of social enterprises. We've done the recovery report to provide recommendations across the city and to other governments on how they can look to support social enterprises and direct their dollars there and why that matters. A lot of the city has so many tools, that they can do to support social enterprises. Also building our framework into a policy would be another thing that we can do. But that we also want to work alongside our communities to advocate to provincial governments and federal governments who also have some of the bigger spending and funding dollars that can trickle down and help build the capacity of local and social enterprises where we might not be able to do that directly.
Thank you. And I've just put into the chat a guide that BiSocial created, which is, to help social value suppliers be able to respond to and get bid ready. And so there's some really good resources within that can support and walk alongside. Thank you, Dave.
Can I ask another question?
Sure. If anybody else has another question too, please go ahead, Dave, and other people can put up their hand in the thing as well. Yes, what's your question?
Hey, Alisha, just another one. I think from a policy perspective, I think a lot of governments are really sort of on board with social procurement. What I find is it tends to fall apart when it gets down to the staffing level, and the actual kind of doing. So, so was there much of this internal training that the city did with just staff regarding social procurement and kind of, again, the values of it and the purpose of it and all those sorts of things to kind of get them on board?
Yeah, definitely. I think education was probably the biggest thing that the city had to do first, is really educate across departments, all staff, and the city leadership teams as to why our existing sustainable and ethical procurement framework is important and why it's important to practice that, and helping each division and department to recognize what its goals are or what projects they have coming forward, where are they looking to contract that work out and put revenue into community, and then how can they go back and look at that framework and support the social, cultural, diverse owned environmental components through that contract process. So I would applaud my colleagues Kim Buxa and Alexander Ralph, who I believe is on this call today, who've gone around and done quite a bit of education across the city on that framework and continue to lead it. And then I think it's about, through our community economic development strategy that we have in the city as well, where we're constantly monitoring and measuring goals and how are we supporting our local suppliers, our social enterprises, and our diverse owned businesses through other projects like poverty reduction projects, CBA policy implementation, any other CED initiatives, and tracking that and continuing to learn and then bringing that education back to our folks in council and our city leadership teams to continue to support this work going forward.
We're coming to our last little bit, and I just wanted to ask, what has been for both of you, what do you see as being the really positive impacts through your role in working with both supply and demand side, what have you seen as sort of what's possible? Let's ask the what's possible question. What's possible when we align procurement into local economies? And I guess I'll ask Amy first.
Sure. I mean, one of the things I like about local and social purchasing is the immediacy of the impact. You know, I worked on, climate change and things like that for years, and absolutely worthy pursuits. But it seemed like a bit of the long game. Whereas, if you divert a contract to a local business, you're having an immediate impact. It's like tomorrow they are going to hire people to staff up, and the benefits are seen immediately. So that's one thing I really like about local purchasing. On the negative side, like I heard from suppliers who lost a contract, a city contract for office supplies about a decade and a half ago, and immediately they had to lay off staff, right? And so that's the kind of negative impact when it doesn't go to a local business. And then there's a local social enterprise clean start that we featured on one of our BCSPI workshops recently, and they've got some fantastic stats around, like, literally they're tracking the social impact of each individual contract they get from BC Housing and the City of Port Coquitlam, and they can tell you, the number of diverse staff, the amount of supportive employment hours provided by the contract. And so, there's some real amazing outcomes that you can help facilitate through these contracts. So my advice is really, like, take a small chunk that you think you can manage, and try to get some success that you can build on within your organization, no matter how big or small you are.
And Alisha, we do have one question for you from the chat, but before we get to that question, how about you answer the what is possible? What are the benefits that you've seen?
Yeah, I think what's possible is getting folks to really understand and believe that social procurement is a powerful tool, and a powerful tool that has so many benefits and so many impacts, such as alleviating poverty in your communities, providing folks who experience poverty with dignifying and meaningful work through local, diverse, and social enterprises. It's boosting, it's supporting, it's building the capacity of your local economy, right down to the neighborhood economy. And you get to watch your local suppliers in your neighborhood and in your city and social enterprises grow and scale, and hear the stories of how they're hiring folks from the neighborhood and how that's impacted their lives, and allow them to participate more fully in their work and in their social lives and in community and in recreation and everything else. You're obviously supporting creating a more healthier community, a more inclusive community. Social procurement is definitely an avenue of decolonizing your purchasing practice and decolonizing your approach to business, and making sure that you can direct purchasing towards Indigenous owned businesses and communities. And such a tool to support your organization in meeting reconciliation goals and the truth and reconciliation calls to action. And so it's definitely something that can support you there. And it's also a tool that definitely helps combat climate change and support local food security, agriculture. I mean, the list of benefits goes on. So it's quite simply just the right thing to do.
Thank you. And we do have a technical question for you, which is just how much weighting does the city usually apply on the social component in the RFP evaluation criteria?
Yeah, that's a great question. So often the framework requires a minimum of 5% weighting on contracts that are 75,000 and under. And then 75,000 above, we still look at that 5% weighting. And then we look to see, depending on the impact and outcomes and the goals, or the type of service or project that contract is impacting, or working toward, we can look to be flexible in that weighting. So we could potentially look at, if we're doing a contract in the downtown east side, where we know there are high numbers of poverty, and there's also a high number of social enterprises in the neighborhood that might be able to respond to that work. We can look to weight that at like 12%, or even 25%. And we could do so that we have 25% is for the social, cultural, environmental component, 25 for technical, 25 for quality, 25 for price, and there's your evaluation framework for your contract. So we do have that flexibility, and as a city, we're looking at different contracts and opportunities to be flexible in that weighting process where possible. But again, hearing where we've made mistakes, where we failed in that regard with contracts, listening to the suppliers and the community, and then thinking differently about that weighting the next time around, and looking for opportunities still within those contracts for our local suppliers to get on board. So it's constant education, constant refining, and something that as we refine and learn from this, we can put into a policy.
Thank you. So I want to just do a final question to you two, because we're running out of time. We're coming to the end of it. Just one next step that you would provide to our participants who want to align their procurement to local economic benefit. What's the one thing that they could do next? Alisha, we'll go with you and then end with Amy.
I think find your community of champions, of social procurement champions, and the folks that have the expertise in education, and find out how you can work with them and learn from them. So folks like even BCSPI and other communities doing this work, and seek out, ask questions, and start seeing where you can learn and pilot these things.
Amy?
Yeah, my advice would be to reach out to the business community. So, if you have several contracts coming up in the next few years, then to figure out who's local, and I can guarantee you're going to be surprised by the amazing suppliers that already exist that you might not have heard about, who are going to not only help, keep the money in the local economy, but also help you meet your other goals in terms of climate and social. So, find out who's local, and you'll be surprised by the awesome businesses that are in your community and region and province.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to pass over to Emma, who's going to share about our next upcoming purchasing power event.
Thanks, Kristi. So coming up on November 24th, in just a couple of weeks, we're talking about food security, which has come up a little bit in today's discussion, but is another super timely topic, especially as we think about supply chain disruption and the things that have happened during the pandemic. And so we'll be hearing from Heather O'Hara from BC Farmers Markets and Jennifer Reynolds from Nourish Healthcare, to get kind of the supply and demand side of how social procurement can support your local food security. So looking forward to that one, and I'll pop the link in the chat as well for registration to that event. Thanks, Kristi.
Everyone, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. I hope you had a chance to sneak something in while you were at it, and we'll see you all and more at the next event.